Have you ever wondered what happens when a spiritual movement gets so big it doesn't just fill churches, but actually starts to change the country itself? Well, that's exactly what happened with the Second Great Awakening. Today, we're diving into how this incredible period of religious revival really did reshape the United States.
So, to get a handle on this, you really have to picture a young America just buzzing with this new kind of spiritual energy. We're talking from the late 1700s all the way to the middle of the 1800s. This wave of revivalism just swept across the nation. And trust me, it was anything but quiet.
You know, one of the biggest names from this era, Reverend Charles Finney, he just nailed it with this quote. He said, "A revival is a new beginning of obedience to God." And for him, that wasn't just about feeling passionate in a sermon. Nope, it was a call to action. It was about getting out there and actively trying to build a better, more moral world. That single idea is the engine for everything we're about to talk about.
So what exactly was the Second Great Awakening? Well, it was this really fascinating mix of religious revivals. On one hand, it kind of brought back some old-school, pretty strict ideas about human sin. But on the other hand, it also sparked the creation of totally new Christian denominations and these incredibly emotional new ways to worship.
Now, something this huge doesn't just pop up out of thin air, right? So that gets us to the big question. Why then? What was going on in America that made so many people so ready for this kind of intense religious experience?
So, what was it that fueled this massive nationwide spiritual fire? The answer is this really interesting cocktail of anxiety about the way things were, but also this powerful sense of optimism about how things could be.
You can almost see the perfect storm brewing right here. First, you've got the rise of democracy, which made people feel empowered as individuals, and they wanted that same personal power in their faith. Then there was a real backlash against the kind of cold logic of the Enlightenment. People were tired of rationalism. They wanted to feel their faith. And you have to remember, the market revolution was creating all this new wealth, but also a ton of anxiety about greed and sin. People were looking for a moral compass, and for a nation of people constantly on the move, the church became that anchor.
Okay, so the stage was set, but how did this message actually get out there? Well, it wasn't through these quiet, sleepy sermons. No way. It was through fiery, passionate preaching that you could find everywhere from the halls of Ivy League colleges to these massive, roaring camp meetings out in the woods.
The Awakening kind of had two different vibes going on at the same time. Back east, you had guys like Timothy Dwight at Yale making these calm, intellectual arguments. But out on the frontier? Whoa, it was a whole different world. You had preachers like Charles Finney and Peter Cartwright, and they were all about raw emotion, tapping right into people's deepest fears of damnation. But their message was also incredibly democratic and empowering. Salvation wasn't just for a few, it was for everybody, if you were willing to reach out and grab it.
And the intensity of this preaching was just legendary. It actually gave us this amazing name for Western New York, the Burned-Over District. The idea was that Finney's revivals were so constant and so white-hot that there was literally no one left to convert. All the fuel had been burned up.
And you know what? This emotional, really accessible style of preaching, it worked. Oh, it worked spectacularly. Traveling preachers on horseback, called circuit riders, met people right where they were. And the results were just staggering. By 1850, the groups that really mastered this approach, like the Baptists and Methodists, had just exploded in size to become the biggest Protestant denominations in the whole country.
But this spiritual fire didn't just make the old churches bigger. In some places, it burned so hot that it actually forged entirely new faiths, many of them uniquely American.
I mean, this period saw the birth of some seriously influential new religions. You have Joseph Smith founding what would become the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1830, and then you get wild stories like William Miller, who convinced tens of thousands of people that Jesus was going to return on a very specific day, October 21, 1844. Now you'd think that when that day came and went, the movement would just fizzle out, right? But with the Millerites, something amazing happened. The movement didn't die. It just evolved. It continued on and became the Seventh-day Adventists, a church that's still very prominent all over the world today.
The story of the Latter-day Saints is especially dramatic. After being founded in New York, they faced intense persecution that just kept pushing them west, first to Ohio, then Missouri, then Illinois. It got so bad that their founder, Joseph Smith, was murdered by a mob. After that, their new leader, Brigham Young, led this incredible trek out into the desert to create a safe haven they called New Zion, and what we now know as Utah. A huge reason for all that opposition was the early church's practice of polygamy. That was a major, major point of conflict with the rest of American society. And it's important to note that the church itself officially banned the practice way back in 1890.
Okay, so we've seen this massive religious explosion. But the biggest question is, so what? Why does any of this matter outside of church history? Well, the answer is that this personal, spiritual mission was about to spill over and kickstart a wave of major social change.
The logic here is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. It all starts with that personal religious awakening. That feeling creates this deep moral duty, not just to save yourself, but to go out and perfect the world around you. And that duty is what directly fueled this explosion of social reform movements.
And look, we're not talking about small fringe movements here. We're talking about the biggest national campaigns of that era. The temperance movement to fight alcoholism, the powerful crusade of abolitionism to end the sin of slavery, and even efforts to improve how society treated people with mental illness, they were all supercharged by the moral certainty that came from the Second Great Awakening.
And this is the really crucial part. The awakening didn't just give people the passion for these reforms, it gave them the infrastructure. These newly energized churches created this incredible network of leaders and highly organized volunteer groups. They basically became the engine for social change, pushing these issues right to the center of American politics.
And all of this leaves us with a really big question to chew on, right? The Second Great Awakening might be a historical event, but the pattern it shows us is timeless. It really makes you ask, how do our deepest beliefs about right and wrong end up shaping the conscience of an entire nation? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.